The world as far as I was concerned ran on clean data. 56 years into my life, I had learned to read this city the way other people read a book. Traffic lights were patterns. Water pressure spikes were events with timestamps. Emergency response times were a river of logs I knew how to trace upstream. I spent my days as the city's senior data architect, finding the shape inside the noise, turning chaos into a truth I could rely on. My apartment matched the work. Books stacked by subject then author, coffee mugs hanging with their handles all facing east, a silence that was arranged rather than empty. I'd built that order the way someone else builds a bank vault. Locks on doors, routines in the morning, nothing left to chance. I'd spent my first 18 years in the foster system. Chaos had been a curriculum. I learned early that if you wanted to survive, you learned to predict, to catalog, to control. Which made the Tuesday in the county services building feel like a data anomaly I couldn't ignore. The room had no windows. The air was thick with bleach and stale coffee. Across the table sat Diana Pierce, clean suit, tight smile. On the table, between us, lay a thin file. I remember thinking how wrong a life looked when it had been compressed to a single staple and a handful of pages. "Liam is 16, she said. "Quiet. Reads nonfiction. Mostly history. Keeps to himself." Her voice was precise, practiced. The file fluttered when she nudged it. 3 group homes in 12 months, notes of noncompliance, social withdrawal. Short lines, clipped language that tried to make a human life fit a form. Then she said the line that changed the data set. "He reacts hard to unfairness." Those words landed in my chest like a dropped object. I'd seen that pattern before, boys who carried anger like a second skeleton, brittle and heavy. They didn't always break things. Sometimes they internalized the force until it shaped them. I kept my face neutral. Habits learned in foster homes stick, reveal nothing they can use against you. "And previous placements?" I asked. "No violence until recently," Diana said. "When he reacts, he shuts down. Becomes a ghost in the house until foster parents request a transfer. There was one fight at school. Another boy made a joke about institutions. Liam broke his nose. He took the suspension and didn't explain himself. I thought of cheap jokes aimed at fractures, those small cuts that reopen with the wrong touch. "Let me guess," I said. "Unknown father. Mother with a history of mental illness?" "Sarah," she confirmed. "No pity, no sales pitch. Just the name. He carries a photo of her. It's the only thing he has of her." She eased a photocopy from the file and slid it across the table. The ink had faded to gray, but the face was there, dark hair, jaw set against whatever life had carved into it. She looked like someone who had learned to endure rather than to belong. "Why me?" I asked, and the question was more practical than plaintive. I'd been licensed for difficult placements for years, but they rarely called. There were reasons the county tapped me for these placements. Older boys were a hard group to place, and my background made me less likely to approach with false hope. Diana was clear. "You were one of them. You know the terrain. You're not trying to be a savior. You're offering a room. Sometimes that's enough." "He had one duffel," she said. "He'd be ready at 5. Walking back to my car through the 5 o'clock traffic, I felt the neat walls I'd built in my life begin to creak. The architect inside me cataloged the risks, the liabilities, the points where the system could fail. Another part of me, one I'd kept quiet for 30 years, recognized an old pattern and softened. Maybe offering a room was all it took. I prepared the spare bedroom, fresh sheets, a lamp on the nightstand, the door checked to close quietly. I left it open. The gesture felt ridiculously small and yet monumental, as if I'd added a single line of code that would change an entire program. Diana's sedan pulled up at 5 on the dot. She stepped out and spoke to the passenger. Then the door opened and he emerged, taller than I expected, shoulders hunched as if his body had been taught to take up less space, a duffel slung over one shoulder. Gray hoodie, dark hair falling into his eyes. He kept his head lowered like a man avoiding the weather. I opened the door before Diana could knock. "Liam," I said. My voice sounded louder in the quiet of the porch. He gave a small nod, barely there. Diana said she'd call on Friday, and left us. Inside, Liam disarmed the place in small, deliberate motions. He removed his shoes and set them side by side against the mat. My golden retriever, Mabel, patted over and sniffed his pant leg. For a second, he glanced at the dog, no smile, but his shoulders unknotted the tiniest amount. He pulled a folded photograph from a hoodie pocket, and with a reverence that looked like ritual, placed it on the nightstand and angled it toward the bed. I showed him the room. He moved like someone taught to measure borders, surveying the desk, the closet, the window. "Bathroom's across the hall," I said. "Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. My schedule is normal, out by 7:30, back around 6. Other than that, this is yours." He unpacked as if unpacking were something dangerous. The duffel opened, and everything was neat: one toothbrush, a few shirts, a worn paperback. He arranged the few things he had with care, and then retreated into silence the way a snail retreats into its shell. The house shifted, making room for this new gravity. The first weeks were an exercise in polite orbit. Mornings were quiet, cereal and coffee at opposite ends of the table, spoons scraping ceramic louder than words. He was meticulous, towels straight, bed made, bathroom spotless. He left no trace. Mabel disagreed with that policy. She nudged her rope toy into his lap until, one evening when I thought no one was watching, I caught him bending his head to scratch her behind the ears. It was a single, honest crack in the fortress he'd built around himself, and it landed with the quiet force of a small miracle. Then, on the third Friday, the pattern broke in a sound, a drawer slammed, a hollow clang that echoed down the hallway. I found him on the floor inside his room, clothes dragged from drawers, his duffel appended, breath ragged and shallow. He was on his hands and knees like someone searching for a loose screw in machinery. "It's gone," he said. His voice had a paper brittleness to it. "The picture. It was right here. I had it right here." We checked under the desk, behind books, inside socks. Nothing. Finally, I lifted the mattress. A pale corner wedged in the gap between box spring and frame, barely visible. "Got it," I said simply, and held out the photograph. He didn't take it politely. He lunged, clutching it to his chest as if the thing were breathing. He curled around it, shoulders shuddering. "I thought I lost her," he sobbed. There's nothing to say in a moment like that. Platitudes are plaster. I left him with the ghost he had nearly lost and went to the kitchen to make dinner, my methodical motions a ritual for an uncertain God. I knocked on his door later and left a plate of pasta on the counter. It was gone by 10, and when he came out to the back porch I stood in the doorway and let him lead the conversation. "She'd sing in the car," he said, not looking at me. "Loud. Never on key. In the mornings, she made these animal pancakes that were usually a little burnt. She'd call them monster rabbits anyway, like it was the funniest thing in the world." It was a confession more than a story. The fragile peace built slowly. He began leaving the bedroom door ajar. We started to share the same room for documentaries, not speaking about them but sitting within the same air. It wasn't fast, but it was forward motion. Then the school called. Vice Principal Thompson's voice on the phone was that particular blend of bureaucratic neutrality and personal discomfort. "Mr. Hayes, there's been an incident involving Liam. Could you come in?" I walked through the school's main doors and saw him immediately. Liam sat on the hard bench outside the office, one hand on his knee, knuckles scraped and raw. Inside, Thompson recited the report with the practiced detachment of someone who had mastered the art of taking no side. "There was a verbal altercation in Mr. Gable's class," Thompson said. Liam responded physically. "What was said?" I asked, not because policy demanded it but because information is how you move from reaction to response. Thompson's eyes flicked to Kyle Jennings, the kid who'd made the joke, then away. "It was an inappropriate comment." He stopped, giving the euphemism gravity and letting it hang. Kyle finally spoke, flushed and defensive. I said he should check out the loony bin library you'd probably visit when you go to see your mom. I felt the old pattern in my chest, the indignity of a cheap jibe flaring the brittle skeleton of anger. Thompson folded back into policy, 5-day suspension. We signed the papers. It felt like watching a small bureaucracy swallow a human being and call it closure. In the car afterward, Liam said, flat and certain, "You're going to send me back." It wasn't a question. It was a computation. He'd run the numbers of his life too many times to be wrong. I killed the engine and turned toward him. "Look at me," I said, and when he complied I gave him something steadier than speech. "There are rules, and there is the line. Rules are things like, you don't hit in school. You'll serve the suspension for breaking a rule. The line is who we are. Someone tried to spit on your mother's memory. That is not a reason to pack your bag and disappear. You live here. Then, because sometimes you have to sketch out a future for someone to trust you," I added. "And come spring, if you want this to be permanent, we'll go to a lawyer. Adoption. For real." He nodded. No theatrics. No gratitude sermonized. The small relaxation in his shoulders was as meaningful as any speech. That single decision, offering him my name on paper, shifted the ground under us. It made temporary into possible foundation. I called Ben that weekend. Ben had taken a different route out of the same chaos. He became a clinical psychologist, devoting his life to people like us with an almost academic patience. We didn't talk much, our lives were compensations for the same past. He arrived in an hour with donuts. We spread the photocopy of Sarah across the kitchen table. Ben squinted. "There's a neon ring behind her shoulder," he said. "Looks like it, Orion Pawn. Oak Street. And that twisted metal spire behind her? Locals called it the Beacon on Oak and 9th. That entire block used to be a mess." I sharpened the scan on my laptop, pushed contrast, enhanced edges, my skill set migrating into detective work. The background resolved, a metal sculpture. A block. A location. That single stray data point felt like a thin thread stretching into a vast tapestry. Ben made a call to an old outreach worker he knew, a Frank Gable, who answered on speaker with a voice like sandpaper. "Sarah," Frank said slowly after a long pause. "Quiet girl. Had a little boy. Came in for food. One day they stopped. When the city tore that block down, some cases were routed to Evelyn Reed. She ran supported living programs. If Sarah didn't vanish, she went through Evelyn's door." Evelyn Reed. The name landed like a new coordinate on a map. Diana made calls, and within a few days she arranged a meeting at Evelyn's office in a repurposed brick schoolhouse. Evelyn was the kind of woman who had been in the world long enough to be both practical and a repository of quiet optimism. She listened as I recited the facts: Oak Street, the Beacon, Frank's memory. Her eyes kept flicking to Liam. "Our records from that time are messy," she said finally. "And confidentiality is strict. I can't just confirm a person. But I'd like to speak with Liam alone." He agreed before I could object. He wanted agency. I sat in the lobby counting the institutional clock ticks and feeling useless. When the door opened, Evelyn came out with a plastic bin labeled in masking tape, "Miscellaneous resident items, Oak Street transfers." Inside, among a single earring and a tattered children's mitten, was a spiral notebook. On the front, in thick, shaky black marker, were the words, "For my star sailor." Liam's body went still in a way that made the room feel smaller. He put his hands on the cover like a man touching something holy and opened it. The inside was rockets and constellations and letters starting, "Hey, bug." He read without sound and then looked up with a face that had been reshaped by validation. "She remembered me," he whispered. "She wrote to me." Evelyn's voice had folded into something softer. "Yes. And she's here." The meeting was scheduled, one guarded 30-minute visit in the garden at the supported living facility. I drove him there with the notebook on his lap like a shield. When he saw her, time folded. The woman from the photo stood by the rosemary, thinner, hair shorter, hands a little more nervous as they reached for him. She touched his cheek like someone testing the realness of a dream. "I wanted to make you pancakes," she whispered. "The monster rabbits. But I didn't know where you were." He opened the notebook and held it toward her. Recognition broke her open. Tears came soft and sudden. She explained, illness that turns sense into fear, patterns in license plates, the logic of someone trying to protect a child by erasing them from a perceived hunter's path. It was broken explanation, and still it was the only one she could offer. He listened. They sat and let weeks of absence leak out in small recollections. When time was up, she asked if he could come back. "Next Sunday," he said without hesitation. The Sundays turned into a rhythm, 30 minutes of a garden becoming a steady calendar entry in our lives. The conversation was cautious and patchworked. Their repair work was delicate and slow. We were all learning to move into a new geometry of family. Court for adoption felt bureaucratic and gut-tight. The hearing room smelled of old varnish and paper. The judge asked a few necessary questions and then, with a small, conclusive strike of her gavel, handed him a name. Liam Hayes. "My son." The word carried like a small thunderclap. Afterward, we went to a diner. He asked the cook if a pancake could be made in the shape of a star. They tried, and the result looked like a 5-pointed suggestion more than a shape, but he grinned at it the way someone grins when they have asked for something and it has been given. Life didn't smooth out entirely. There was a cost for any change people can see. It began with whispering internet posts and an anonymous thread about at-risk youth in our school. Then Robert Jennings, the town's developer and father of Kyle, posted a photo from the writing contest ceremony where Liam won, and the caption bristled with thinly veiled contempt about diverse family structures. It was the old world reaching in with a digital finger. I could have stayed behind my data and let numbers be the weapon. Instead, I documented everything: screenshots, timestamps, the provenance of the posts. I took the dossier to the school board and I spoke. "My son is not a risk," I said. "He is a survivor. The stigma you allow to fester is more dangerous than any punch he could ever throw." Ben spoke, calm and clinical, dismantling the prejudice with facts. Evelyn spoke last, and whatever softness she might have had was framed in a quiet moral pressure. "People who rebuild themselves every day are strong in ways you don't measure," she said. "They deserve respect." The reaction was quicker than I expected: an internal investigation, the anonymous poster exposed, a forced apology typed and lawyer-approved from Jennings. The school fast-tracked an anti-stigma program. It wasn't victory in the grand sense, but it was damage control that mattered. We had changed a single node in the system, and it rippled outward. Sarah came to our house for breakfast one Saturday. She tried to flip a pancake and mangled it. They both laughed until it sounded like a small hymn. The rest of the day took on a new domestic hum: someone whipping eggs, the dog snoring on the rug, Liam telling a story about a history book he'd read twice because the maps had fascinated him. Months later, Liam won a city writing contest with an essay called Home. He read the last line at the awards ceremony and the auditorium held its breath. Home is the place that keeps your shape, even when you're not in it. He scanned the crowd for Sarah and found her, and when she caught his eye, their nod was like a private sine wave of recognition. Later, she gave me a new photograph she'd asked Evelyn to take on our porch, the two of them, side by side, smiling. "He should have a better one now," she said. That night, Liam hung that photograph beside the old photocopy, the defiant girl from the past and the breathing woman who had returned. He taped them close enough that when he turned the pages of a book, both faces could see him. He stood there for a moment, 2 pictures in his hands, and then he looked at me. "Thanks, Art," he said, then corrected himself in a small, firm way. "Dad." It was simple and final in the only way that mattered. I felt my chest tighten with something that had nothing to do with server logs or predictable outputs. I closed my mouth and nodded because words would have stripped the moment into data, and not all truth wants to be parsed. The systems in my life were running again, but they were changed. My routines had new inputs and different outputs. The apartment wasn't a fortress so much as a home that flexed. I still arranged my mugs to face east. I still liked the comfort of predictable patterns. But now the data set was a living thing, its logic expanded by the sound of a boy humming as he read, the memory of monster rabbit pancakes, the warmth of a dog at the foot of the bed, and the quiet gravity of a photograph taped to a bookshelf. Control felt different when you built it around people instead of departures. The architecture I'd made to shield myself had become a scaffold. It could hold more than solitude. It could hold repair. At night I sometimes catch Liam reading under the lamp, the small circle of light forming its own geography on the bedspread. He places the old and the new photos side by side sometimes, and studies them like maps. Once he asked me, in a voice less guarded than it used to be, "Do you think she'll remember more?" "She will," I said, because it felt true. And because the truth sometimes needs to be offered like a bridge built across a river. We kept building. Small moves, visits, paperwork, laughter at bad pancakes, stacked into a life that was messy and warm. There were still log entries and incident reports in the margins of our weeks, as there always would be for anyone who's been through what we'd been through. But there was also routine and a future that had a name on it, and a seat at the kitchen table for three. The city's data still hummed, but the most important patterns I learned to read were human. I'd learned that control isn't a closed system, but a map with open lines, that the best architecture isn't a fortress, but a home that gives you room to change shape. It's a quiet filled not with absence, but with trust. On rare nights, I'd walk past Liam's room and the two pictures on his shelf would catch the lamp like small beacons, one of endurance, one of return. The systems I ran had error logs and patches, but this was different. This was repair. And the final proof came one morning, as I was leaving for work. "See you later, Dad," he called from the kitchen. My hand froze on the doorknob. My throat closed with a quiet that wasn't a problem to solve, but a thing to hold. Outside, the day unfolded in patterns I could read. Inside, the house stretched in quiet, living proof of recovery and stubborn love. That was enough. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.